We'll see that he pleads for mercy. He's confident that God hears him, and then he is able to say that his enemies just go away, depart. Okay, scram, once he is confident that he knows that the Lord has heard him. So let me go ahead and read Psalm chapter 6, 1 through 10, and then we'll break it down after that. So the chief musician, Neganoth upon Sheminith, somehow having to do with either an 8-stringed instrument or an octave or notes, some type of melody or notes in the title there. It's a psalm of David. O Lord, rebuke me not in thine anger, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure. Have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are vexed. My soul is also sore vexed, but thou, O Lord, how long? Return, O Lord, deliver my soul. O save me for thy mercy's sake. For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave who shall give thee thanks? I'm weary with my groaning all the night. Make I my bed to swim. I water my couch with tears. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all mine enemies. Depart from me, all ye workers of iniquity, for the Lord hath heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord hath heard my supplication. The Lord will receive my prayer. Let all mine enemies be ashamed and sore vexed. Let them return and be ashamed suddenly. So again, tonight's title is Lord Help Me. It's a prayer of David, a penitential song. And what does he request? We see his request in verses 1 through 7. David essentially cries out for help. Lord, help me. Be merciful to me. Verse 1, where he says, O Lord, rebuke me not in thine anger. He says, Lord, don't judge me. Lord, don't convict me in your anger, neither chasten me. Don't spank me or punish me in your hot displeasure, in that heated anger, but rather have mercy upon me. That is the Hebrew word kanan, stoop low in kindness toward me. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for I'm weak. I'm sick. O Lord, heal me. I need your cure, for my bones are vexed. So basically, don't rebuke me. My body is weak. I'm sick. It's like a flower that's wilted and drooping. My strength has withered. It's gone. Not only has his body, he feels, lost all of its strength, his bones are vexed. The word vexed there means to tremble inwardly, to palpitate. His bones are just trembling because of agitation. He doesn't feel God's presence, and if God is present, he doesn't want God to be angry because sin somehow is in this. David, like some of us often do, and rightly so, sometimes when we get sick, and I think this is what's happening here, David, he says his body's weak, his body is sick. Oftentimes, the first thought that crosses our mind when we get physically sick is, am I getting judged for sin? Sometimes it's possibly true. We do know that the Lord does allow some sickness because of sin, right? We know from 1 Corinthians 11, some people took the Lord's table unworthily, and he says, look, this is why some of you are sick. This is why some of you are asleep. Some of you are dead, died because you took the Lord's Supper unworthily. So sometimes sickness is judgment. God often, though, permits sickness to come into a person's life, like the man born blind. Why was this man born blind? Because his parents were sinners, or was he a sinner? And Jesus said no, but so that God's great grace should be shown in his life. Remember the story of Lazarus. Okay, Jesus wasn't going to restore him, or wasn't in a rush to go and heal him. Why? So that God's glory could be displayed in his life. So that's sometimes why sickness gets into a person's life. Other times, God uses sickness, as in those cases, to display his power and glory, but other times, as in Romans 5:3, the Apostle Paul says, we glory in our tribulations. We are Because our tribulations, whether they be sickness or circumstances, they help to produce patience. So God allows sickness to produce patience at some times. Sometimes he allows sickness to prevent sin. Remember what happened with the Apostle Paul. 3 times he asked for the Lord's deliverance. 3 times he was denied the thorn in the flesh. And he goes, the reason why I'm allowed the thorn in the flesh essentially is to keep me humble, to keep me from sinning. So that's another reason why some people are allowed to get sick, so that they would stay humble. Another reason we see in Philippians 2:30, Paul is writing about a guy who overworked himself for ministry, Epaphroditus. He says about Epaphroditus, he is sickly because he worked too much for ministry. So sometimes sickness comes because of overwork. And lastly, the scriptures show us that sometimes sickness comes because of old age. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, 3-6. You know the song, Someday the silver cord shall break. That's the picture. Someday your light's just going to stop shining because you're going to get old and you're going to go the way of all the earth, according to the Old Testament. So now that you're depressed, here, in this case here, I believe David is saying, God, don't judge me because of his sin. The sin in his life is weighing down. He feels the absence of God, so he says, God, don't judge me. Rebuke me not, neither chasten me in your hot displeasure. He goes on to say in verse 3, my soul is sore vexed. Again, the word vexed means he's inwardly trembling. And the only cure for a trembling soul is the mercy of God. And so that's what he prays. Verse 3, he goes, how long? How long am I going to be sick? How long will I suffer? It has already been a long time, and he's constantly looking for God and God's answer to intervene and help. It seems now that, again, he realizes the cure for his soul's vexation, his soul's trouble, is the mercy of God. His inner life, his mind, his emotions, his will, they're all affected. And he says, how long? And the answer to a soul's trouble is verse 2, where he says, have mercy on me. That is, you know what mercy is? Mercy is God withholding from you what you deserve. So he pleads for God's mercy. He doesn't plead, God, judge me according to righteousness. He doesn't say, judge me according to justice. He says, have mercy. And it is mercy that cures soul anxiety and soul trouble, especially because of sin. And then, of course, we know grace. Grace means that God will give us what we don't deserve. He'll give us his goodness and the benefits of his goodness. Now, let's look at verse 4 here. He says, return, O Lord, deliver my soul. O save me for thy mercy's sake. There's the word mercy again. For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave, who shall give thee thanks? So, Lord, please do rescue me. Just like in verse 3, he requested, have mercy. But now, in verses 4-6, we see him saying, return. For some reason, there was separation. And I think that's why he's talking about sin here. Some reason, the Lord is not in fellowship, or he's not in fellowship with the Lord. So he prays, return unto me, O Lord. It was his sin that was separating him from his God. So God was going to let him be filled with his own ways. Now David corrects himself. Again, he doesn't plead for justice. He calls on mercy again, according to verse 4. And then in verse 5, it's interesting here. His understanding of life after death and what you can do after death was limited. We have the New Testament, knowing that after death we can still praise God. We can still sing praises. In fact, we will in heaven. He wasn't sure. He didn't have all full revelation. And so he says, he's reasoning here in verse 5, where he says, For in death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave who shall give thee thanks? So he is reasoning, God, if you spare my life, you restore me to health, then I'm going to be able to praise you, because dead men don't praise. So keep me alive that I might praise you. It's a desirable thing to be alive and to remember God's goodness and to praise him for his blessings, because dead men tell no praises. And so that's his reasoning. So rescue me. Have mercy on me. For your mercy's sake, dead people don't praise you. Keep me alive, that I might praise you. So that verses 4 and 5, the essential request is rescue me. Don't rebuke me, don't judge me, but rather rescue me. Now let's look at verse 6, and we'll see why he requests what he requests. Verse 6, Psalm 6:6. I am weary with my groaning. All the night make I my bed to swim. I water my couch with my tears. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all mine enemies. So why does he request this? Because of verse 3, he's sick at heart, in soul and body. And then verses 6 and 7, why do I ask for you to rescue me? Because my eyes, I am worn out. I've been weeping. I've been sobbing. I've soaked my pillow with crying. I've drenched my bed with tears. And apparently his eyes are probably sunken because he was up all night. He's crying. He's weeping. As verse 7 says, mine eye is consumed because of grief. It seemed that his life was filled to overflowing with trouble. He can't stand it anymore. And his vision was even being affected because of all his weeping. His eyes are flooded with tears, and some believe it was during the occasion. This is after the occasion where he had to flee from his own son and from his best friend and good counselor, Ahithophel. So I think that's a good occasion to experience this type of weeping and sorrow. I think it's a good explanation if it is the case. And so he reminds God, God, I have wept tears of repentance and confession. My bed should be a place of rest, but it's a place of prayer, a place of trial. Please hear me. And so after that, he goes to verse 8. After all the troubles he lists, he is reassured here. He experiences trust in troubles because he knows this, and we know this too. Prayer changes things. And so he's confident here. He'll repeat 3 times how confident he is that God hears. Because somehow, even though the New Testament says it, the Old Testament is not quite as clear, somehow the Spirit of God witnesses with his spirit that God hears him. And so he's confident. He has a strong conviction. Because God hears, my prayers are answered. Because he's already asked for God's mercy, his heart is clean. Sin has been removed. He's been restored in fellowship. And now he's confident in prayer. Let's look at verses 8 through 10. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity, for the Lord hath heard the voice of my weeping. Verse 9, the Lord hath heard my supplication. The Lord will receive my prayer. Let all mine enemies be ashamed and sore vexed. Let them return and be ashamed suddenly. So David is reassured here, and he names his problems. Who are his problems? The workers of iniquity, and then his enemies. And it's neat. He understands, he knows that God hears him. He's no longer cowering or cowed by their threats. He realizes, look, God hears me, and God is going to rise and fight for me. There's no doubt in my mind that he knew some promises from the Old Testament. In fact, one of his prayers, Psalm 35, will also indicate this truth, is that God will fight for me. I am troubled and sore vexed because of my sin and because of mine enemies, but I've confessed, I've pleaded for mercy, so my sin's out of the way. Now his enemies are going to be sore vexed. God is going to trouble those who trouble him. The Apostle Paul says that in the New Testament. So there is a principle here of this truth from Deuteronomy 1:30. And I'll read a couple of these passages. There's about maybe a dozen of passages like this in regards to how God will fight your enemies for you. Listen to this. Deuteronomy 1:30. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall fight for you, according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Deuteronomy 20, verse 4. For the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. 2 Chronicles 32:8. The same principle. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. Psalm 35, verse 1. This is David's prayer. Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me. Fight against them that fight against me. So he is in verses 8 through 10 here, or 8 and 9. He is confident that the Lord is going to hear his weeping and his prayer, so much so that he tells the enemies, he commands the enemies, depart, go away. God's heard me. He's going to arise, and you're going to be sore vexed. Let's just look at it again. In verse 8, the Lord hath heard the voice of my weeping. Verse 9, the Lord hath heard my supplication. The second half of verse 9, the Lord will receive my prayer. So, the Hebrew there gives room for it to be in past tense. The Lord has received my prayer. So, 3 confident affirmations. The Lord has heard. The Lord has heard my supplication. The Lord has heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord will receive my prayer. He is absolutely convinced after a 3-fold affirmation, God hears me. And if God hears me, guess what? When he arises, depart. You're going to lose. You're going to be sore vexed. I was troubled in soul at the beginning. In the beginning of this prayer, it was dark and gloomy. But once I received mercy, a sunbeam breaks through the dark clouds, though the storm clouds darken the sky. Okay, we were going to sing that tonight. Over the heavenly trail. I keep what? Trusting my Lord, he will never fail. And that's what's happening here from verse 1 to verse 10. It is dark and dreary. He is depressed. His eyes are sunken in. He's been weeping and crying. He pleads, Lord, don't punish me. Rather, give me mercy. He receives it, and then he prays. And then by the end, the clouds depart. Faith revives. The conviction that he has that God hears rises up, so much so that he can say to his enemies, depart. Go away, scram, because my Lord is going to arise and fight for me. So the sun shines by the end, even though at the beginning there was darkness and sadness and weeping. So what 2 principles do we get as we draw from here so we may pray this evening? Number 1, because I think it's because of sin why he pleaded for mercy. We ought not to take sin lightly in our lives because it does separate us from God. We should never harbor sin in our lives, but if we do, and you will sin, you can go and plead for mercy, and you'll receive it. Not based upon your goodness, but based upon God's mercy and his grace. You will receive forgiveness, and God will restore you. So if you're living with unconfessed sin tonight, let's confess it in your hearts, if not publicly. Confess it in your heart. Receive the forgiveness. You can know then that the heavy hand of chastening will be lightened, and you'll receive God's forgiveness. So that's number 1. Confess your sin. Plead the mercy. Number 2, as we draw away another principle of prayer here, is that whether it is literal enemies in your life or challenges in your life, whatever it is, we have challenges here in the ministry. We have to find fit people in certain places still. That's a challenge. But let's have faith that the Lord is going to meet our challenges or deal with our enemies, whatever it is. Personally, in your life or as a church, God is going to meet the needs because he can. You know, sometimes this is regarded as a get me out of this prayer, get me out of this circumstance prayer. Sometimes we have to pray those. But sometimes, if he doesn't get me out of this prayer, you pray, get me through this prayer. So you have to be able to discern. Can God get you through? Yes. Can God get you out? Yes. He can change the circumstances. We believe that. We absolutely believe that he can change the circumstances. But what happens when circumstances don't change? God doesn't answer your prayer. That's a get me through prayer that you pray now. If the external circumstances don't change, that means God is working on the internal. He's working for you to change. That's a get me through prayer. Either way, whether God changes the circumstances or God changes us, God will get the glory, and for that we rejoice. Amen? All right.